We have with us on the program Michael Peffer. He's our attorney from heads up our Southern California office for the Pacific Justice Institute. Now, Michael, last week we talked about serious challenges to free speech and liberty at public universities like Berkeley and what's taking place on campuses across the country. I want to hone in on a couple of real cases, real actual incidents where we at Pacific Justice Institute are fighting back. One specifically is dealing with a professor, and he was actually fired, right? Tell us more.
That's right, Brett. Thanks for having me. Our guy Eric Thompson is his name, and he was 11, 12-year professor, tenured, well-respected for his peers, had a good class. He teaches sociology, and it began to happen at the time when the Supreme Court was getting ready to hear the Obergefell decision. That is the decision that legalized gay marriage. It began to happen that his position started to be attacked by fellow professors and students. And so his
position was what?
He was professor, a tenured professor for sociology. And what happened is one particular class where there was controversy, I'll say in quotes, the controversy is that he was simply looking for both sides of the discussion with respect to the Obergefell decision.
Okay. Both sides. So it wasn't an indoctrination ceremony like many classrooms across the country and universities. He was actually trying to give both sides on the issue of same-sex marriage.
Exactly. And more specifically, because this is a sociology class, he was trying to discuss what effect this has on the study of sociology, family units, social units. And so he merely was playing not so much devil's advocacy, but as saying, here, this is such a weighty issue for our time, which I can't think of a more weighty issue that was happening in our culture than was happening in at that time.
Right.
And a student got offended by the discussion, and it sort of steamrolled from there. And eventually, other incidents, which I believe were trumped-up incidents, started occurring, and eventually he got fired.
He got fired?
A tenured professor.
Okay, so the core reason he was fired, as we look at the facts, goes back to the fact that he was giving both sides, stimulating thought to see both perspectives, as opposed to an attitude of hardcore ideology, indoctrination. There's only one way to thinking, and it's this way. That's what we see in most universities, and I think they should be fired because universities are supposed to stimulate thinking, critical thinking, not be engaging in indoctrination. He was actually doing his job, and I guess it's so foreign in such an intolerant society like we have in so many universities that he was fired for that. And he said some things were trumped up. I don't want to get too much into the details of it because we're defending him. We at Pacific Justice Institute, we do it without charge, correct?
That's right. We are defending him. We've been with him, working with him for several months now, probably almost a year, because there's the process that he had to go through.
Right.
But your statement about stimulating ideas is so important because the law in this area regarding academic freedom says exactly that. The U.S. Supreme Court, the California Supreme Court, many other courts have said that central to accomplishing the goals of a university is a free and open discussion of ideas, some of them differing, some of them not differing from the social norms, but nonetheless, this has to be, otherwise you don't have a valuable education.
Right, and we have professors, and even in public schools, high schools, where they're booting kids out of class because a student will raise their hand and challenge what they're saying or ask a challenging question, and they're called names and booted out of class. It's like the idea of open discussion, critical thinking. It's just being shut down at such a wide scale. Now, this is not the only professor case we've had where we've seen this kind of intolerant bigotry taking place in our universities, is it?
No, it's not, and we've handled several of these cases. And to borrow your metaphor, Mr. Thompson, he got booted out of class. He's the professor, a tenured professor, and he got booted out of class.
Tenured professor, booted out of class.
Because he didn't support the current favored ideology.
Yeah, and that's a real shame for public, taxpayer-funded university, I might add.
That's right.
Not even private university or college, taxpayer-funded public university.
Yes.
So we're taking that on. Folks, I want you to be praying for us on this case, praying for our attorneys who are involved in this case, like Michael, he's actively involved in this case. But we have another matter that's come up, and it's dealing with free speech on a university campus, dealing with the pro-life movement and their desire to put on an event, and something happened. Tell us more.
Yes. Well, our client, and we're going to be a little vague on the details because this is just right now happening, in fact, in the last week. But we have a pro-life, I'll say activist, a person who believes strongly in the pro-life position.
Right.
And he set up an event with the okay of certain persons at this particular college. He sets this event up, gets approval, and now here he's 2 weeks away from the event, and now they're starting to say, oh, well, you can't have this over here because it might be controversial, or you must go over to this area way out here in the back or in some closet. I'm being facetious. But mind you, this is not a guy who just wants to talk about one side. He set up the event where somebody is going to talk about both sides of the issue. A pro-abortion person and a pro-life person. So it's not like they're just going to beat up on the poor pro-abortion people. They have someone from their own side that's coming prepared to speak. And
I can see I see why there's an objection here, because the pro-life movement is gaining steam, gaining lots of ground, both on the legal front as well as on the public opinion front. And in public universities, it's gaining ground. So those who despise the pro-life movement, who want to support pro-death, pro-abortion mills like Planned Parenthood and the like, they don't want this, because they know when there's debates on this issue from a public policy perspective, with logic and reasoning, it weighs on the side of pro-life versus pro-abortion. That said, this is still a taxpayer-funded university.
That's right.
We need to have free speech. Berkeley's done this. They're tyrannical. They're tyrants when they try to isolate speech and they put it way out over here where no one can get to it. Very few seats, limited seating. These kind of tactics, we see this taking place, and we at Pacific Justice Institute, I'm going to tell you folks, if you hear something like this happening in your area, we at Pacific Justice Institute, we don't want to let this happen and just ignore it. If you see this happening, contact us at Pacific Justice Institute, because we want to make sure that those with messages of truth, those who want to give positive information, particularly to young people who oftentimes do have crises in this area, that they have the opportunity to get that information. I mean, as we speak, I know in California, there is pending legislation that would require all public university health centers to give out pro-abortion inducing medication. And without the proper counseling and support that a pro-life center would have, completely trying to undermine the ability for young women in crises and potential fathers in crises to have the counseling and support that they need. Now, as we deal with this case, Michael, we're talking here about First Amendment freedoms and liberties, right? We're not talking about some little ordinance, a little municipal code that's being violated. We're talking about the United States Constitution being trampled upon. And do you think that, I mean, obviously we're going to see this to the end. That's what we do at Pacific Justice. But do you think that we're going to see more of these increase if we're not going to step up to the plate to challenge these as they come? I think it's very important we challenge these.
I completely agree. And the issue with the First Amendment, this is a thing that our framers, they came here, and part of the reason they came here is because the king persecuted them for their speech that disagreed with the king, and their religion that disagreed with the king's religion. This is central. This isn't just a part of our governing documents. These issues are central to our survival as a constitutional republic. And if we don't stand up, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is that the voices that are unpopular, read conservative voices, Christian voices. They are going to be pushed out of the mainstream of ideas. And frankly, we cannot sleep through this. We must fight these things.
That's right. It can't be taken lightly. Public universities, college campuses across the country, they're a huge influence. They're the rudder as far as the direction of our country. We've seen that for good, and we've seen it for bad. And this, I would say, is definitely for bad, because we're not just talking about perspective and viewpoint. We're talking about the ability to have free speech at all, and the ability for, whether it's a pro-life movement or people sharing their testimony or who knows what, for them not to be treated like second-class citizens in a forum that's supposed to be the open marketplace of ideas, the forum that's supposed to be the most open for free speech and expression. So, folks, there you have it. It's our God-given freedoms we're talking about. Now, let's choose to keep them. I'm Brad Dacus with Pacific Justices. Have a great weekend.